So first off, my name is James Goodfellow, and I am product marketing for a company called Progress. And specifically within Progress, I work for a division called Progress Data Direct. Progress Data Direct is the leading supplier and vendor for data connectivity solutions. So 8 of the 9 leading BI and analytics vendors currently embed our software. We work with over 350 ISVs to embed our software to allow for connectivity between their applications and their customers. And then finally, over 10,000 enterprises are currently using our connectors to connect their data back to their applications. And so, obviously walking around the floor today, there's a lot of really cool, really interesting vendors that are creating and doing wonderful things with data. And what our goal is to do is to connect that data back to the tools that you're using to really analyze and to get a sense of, okay, how well are my programs performing? How well is my enterprise performing? So that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. And specifically what I want to talk about is this idea of being able to codelessly connect any application that you use with any of the data sources that you use. And that seems like a very simple thing, but all too often, from an operational standpoint, and I'm someone who has worked in operations for many years, that seems like it would be easy and it seems like it would be an intuitive thing, but it's not always easy and it's not always intuitive. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But first, I'm going to severely date myself, because when I was a kid, I had one of these in the house, and I'm sure a few of you did as well. And if you wanted to get in touch with me, you could either call me on this, or you could send me a note in the post, in the mail. And that was really it as far as how you could get in touch with people. And you contrast that to today, whereas if you want to get a hold of me today, or you can get a hold of me on the phone, by text, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, right? I mean, the world is changing, and there's just more and more ways of connecting people and getting in touch with people the way that you want to get in touch with them. Well, the world of data access is a lot the same way, right? So it started out with a simple database, and this database was generally on-prem, and it was controlled, and it was easy to connect to, and it was a very controlled system. Well, you contrast that with today, where you've got multiple ways and multiple locations and multiple languages that are connecting data. And so much like the previous slide, where there's been an explosion in the way that you can connect with people, there's been an explosion in the places and the ways that you can connect data. And it's important for us to remember as data users and the people in the data ops world that as these opportunities expand, we can't leave behind the fact that you've got to be able to connect to it. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here, right? In the early days of data access, it was an on-prem solution, as I mentioned. It was relational databases, it was data warehouses, and these were on-site, these were controlled. It was easy to control who could access these data sources and who couldn't. It was easy to make sure that not too many people had access, so you didn't have a decline in the performance of the data systems. And this didn't require a significant amount of authentication or data security because it was a fairly closed system. And then to meet these needs, ISVs and enterprises simply connected via ODBC or JDBC into these systems to get the data that they needed back into an analytics application or into a BI application. And that worked fine. But what you see here is sort of a common approach, right? You've got these as an example of the different tools that everybody's using to pull in business intelligence data, to pull in analytics data, to do great things and to derive insights from this data. And the data is coming from multiple locations, right? It's coming from flat files, it's coming from databases and data warehouses, and we're connecting via ODBC and JDBC. And this is a very common approach, and I'd wager that everybody in here is probably using some form of this right now. But what's inescapable is the rise of APIs, right? APIs are everywhere. APIs are growing. Programmable web, if you can see it, put this table out, I don't know, a year or so ago, and it just shows the over the past 10, 15 years the just explosion and the number of APIs that are publicly available, as well as the number of APIs that are being created internally within an enterprise for the purpose of controlling who can access data and how they can access data and what specific data they can access. Not everybody's going to have the same level of access. Not everybody's going to have the same need for the data. So these APIs are created internally and externally to simplify that process and streamline that process. And it's great. And from an authentication and access standpoint, from a data masking and replication and lineage standpoint, this is a wonderful way to share that data. However, that's not to say that there aren't challenges with this evolution and with this rise of APIs. First of all, if you go back to that earlier architecture slide I showed you, a lot of the BI analytics programs don't speak directly to APIs. There's the traditional REST API, which is the most used and the most common out there, and those REST APIs don't always talk or aren't always friendly with the BI applications. And in addition, if you want to get that data into your application, you've got a couple of options where you can build your own custom driver, or you can build some sort of workflow that's going to transform the data and move it into it. But you really don't have time for that. You don't have the resources for that. You've got developers on site, and they don't need to spend their time building those connections for these one-off scenarios. And then the other thing is, if you do build it, you still have to maintain it, and you still have to ensure that, okay, it works now, but if 6 months from now the API connector goes down and your development resources are tied up, how long can you go with being blind to that API data? And remember, API data is not just grabbing Twitter data, right? It's also if you are exposing internal data via some form of your own internal API. Even if it's something you created, it's still an API that doesn't natively speak back to the BI analytics tools. So what we've done here at Progress Data Direct is we've come up with this product that we've launched earlier this year, and it's called the Autonomous REST Connector. And the idea is that it's going to take API data, whether it's internally or externally hosted, and you're going to be able to connect to it, and it will actually expose your data as SQL queryable data. And it actually does it in, and it always sort of, makes me skeptical when people say, oh, it does it in minutes. It actually does it in minutes. We have a stand over here where you can come and we'll actually walk you through a demo of just how quickly it does it. But you take your API, you drop in the URI for the API, you put in whatever your authentication credentials are for multiple authentication methods, and it creates an on-the-fly driver that connects that API and makes it visible and available to Power BI or Tableau or whatever your data source is. And in a lot of instances, it's going to be more powerful than what you get from a native driver, simply because in addition to be able to pull data, you can also query it, and you can also pull specific time ranges and specific parameters that you can't always do with a native driver. So it honestly, it quickly and it codelessly creates that direct connection. And beyond that, another cool thing that it does, it's what we call the secret sauce, right? It's this idea of intelligent sampling. What it's going to do is it's going to read the JSON file. It's going to infer the data schema based on the JSON file. And so what you get returned is a tabular format of the data that was from that API that you can query just as if it came from a database. So what you're ultimately looking like once you employ this type of process is your same BI analytics platforms that you're using. This is just a sample, but you can input any BI analytics application or any other application, right? Now you're going through Autonomous REST Connector. You're not hand coding this. This is a product that can be pointed at 1 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 different APIs, and it can be across cloud data, hybrid data, on-prem data, and you can start analyzing all that data along with all of your traditional SQL sources. You can perform joins across multiple APIs. So it gives you the flexibility to be able to go in and get a true picture of all your data, not just the data that's sort of SQL compliant. So what are the obvious benefits, right? You codelessly connect to that API. You have that ability to view that data, to analyze that data, to query that data. It's no code, but it's not no code because we want everybody in enterprise to use it. It's not meant for that, but it is meant for something that your business analysts, your data scientists, your marketing ops people, right? These are the people that depend on data, and they need a quick solution that isn't going to tie up development resources as engineering resources. IT developers and IT managers, they don't have extra time and extra bandwidth to be able to throw toward building and maintaining and constantly updating and being on the hook for these API connections. So instead, this takes care of it, and this is a real-time, built-for-purpose, enterprise-grade connection. And then, boom, you've got your seamless connectivity into the API data. And again, you can add in as many APIs as you want. And as long as they're REST APIs, and as long as they're returning some sort of JSON file, you've got it covered. So, from a bottom line standpoint, I like to use the analogy of a factory. Autonomous REST connector is a factory that quickly brings this API data into a format that you can use so that you can get on with the business of analyzing your data, of making decisions based on that data, and it does it outside of the need for devoting IT and development resources toward it. So I just wanted to go through a couple of examples, and these aren't, this is just a sample, a couple of cross-section types of APIs, because a lot of times we'll talk to people and we'll say, oh, hey, we've got this tool and it does all these great things, and they're like, yeah, that's cool, and then you say, well, can you use it? And they're like, I don't know, what kind of APIs do I want to connect to, right? And so I wanted to just throw a couple of ideas out there, right? Alpha Vantage is it's an API repository for financial markets data, right? So you've got stock market data that's being generated, and rather than the sort of typical process of taking a cut of that data, exporting it, importing it into your BI or analytics platform to do whatever kinds of massaging you want to that data, instead you just access it directly off the API. And so you can grab it and you can start doing time series analysis, and you can start looking and querying and looking for patterns, looking for whatever those business insights that you're looking for directly from the API. As long as you have authentication, you've got access, and you can get it to, Bing search data, right? Bing and Microsoft have indexed millions and millions of documents across the web, and now rather than having to go through the generic search query, instead you can actually have an API reach out and grab those returns and pull them into your application. HubSpot, I'm a marketer, HubSpot and Eloqua and Marketo, these applications, right? They generate a ton of data, and they generate a ton of data that your company's going to use from a marketing analytics standpoint, from a sales analytics standpoint, from an operational standpoint, and that's great. I love to see all these awesome programs, but if I go up to these people and I say, hey, how can I get your data out? And they say, well, we have a direct feed into, the biggest, the top tier analytics platforms. But if you're on a smaller program or your own homegrown system, you're kind of out of luck, and you're basically back to exporting to a CSV file and then handing it over to somebody else and having them import it somewhere else. And that violates all sorts of logical and potentially legal implications. So what instead you're going to do here is you've got your analytics platform. You're now able to pull in that marketing and sales operations data and analytics data, and you're able to analyze it alongside of other campaign and programmatic data. This is a fun one. Yelp is, we did a webinar a couple of months back, and we actually used Yelp as the sample on the demo, and it's great because you can run a report. You can do SQL queries on Yelp data where you're looking for lawyers in the North Carolina area where I'm from, or you can look for restaurants in the in downtown London. So there's any number of different ways that you can query this data and pull exactly the fields and exactly the parameters that you're looking for. Zoho is here today, their CRM program, and it doesn't have to be Zoho. It could also be Salesforce. We also connect with, you can also reach out to APIs for Sugar CRM, any number of different CRM programs. You go out and you can grab that data via an API, and you bring it in, you start analyzing it, and it takes those extra steps and those extra connectivity headaches out of the whole process. Box is another business application where you have underlying data on usage and on how people are accessing this data and types of file data transfers, right? And all of that is generating additional data that you could be using and leveraging internally, and now you have the ability to access that API, right? Zendesk is another wonderful example, because from a support data standpoint, and really across the whole DevOps world, there's all kinds of development and support and applications out there that are only servicing data via API. Well, now you have access to that data, and you can bring it in, and you can look at it across your enterprise alongside the other data that you're using to make decisions. So, keeping it brief, I just want to bottom line it again and say, Autonomous REST Connector brings 4 really key things that if you walk out of here today, I want you to remember these. One, it's fast. If I can say it's fast, I'm in marketing, I understand. You're skeptical. Come by the stand, the Progress stand, and we'll actually walk you through how to make these API connections, and it's super fast. In addition, it is codeless. You don't have to write code. You basically, you're pointing at the API, you're entering your credentials, it creates the driver, and then it exposes the data just like it's any other file or any other data source. And just to this next point, intelligent, going back to that idea of intelligent sampling, which is really cool, and that's why we call it autonomous, right? Because it's not just creating a connection, it's inferring based on underlying data, it's inferring what those fields are going to be, and it's going to build that schema so that you don't have to go through the process of doing it. Now, obviously, it's not always going to be 100% accurate, so you have plenty of opportunity to go in and make changes to that underlying schema and customize it however you'd like. But from a Go standpoint, it's so much quicker, and more times than not is going to be the exact schema that you're looking for. And then finally, it's customizable. So again, it's going to make a schema, it's going to infer how you're going to use the data, but you can always go in and change it, customize it to your liking. So I know that was quick, but I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions, and you can ask me, or like I say, you can come over to the booth and we can actually walk you through a live example of it and just see how it works. So any questions?